A lighthouse.
Today, we're in eastern Canada off the coast of Nova Scotia. Many people here depend on fishing to make a living.
A fishing boat.
My primary income is from lobster fishing. Our season starts the last Monday in November, and it runs for 6 months.
Michael Larkin.
But today, we're not fishing for lobster, we're fishing for plastic.
We just left Shelburne Harbor, and we're sailing out about 15 to 20 miles, and we're going to go look for some ghost gear. We actually got the information from another fisherman that he had been snarled up into some gear here. He had to let it go back to bottom because it was too dangerous.
Jesse McIntyre.
Ghost gear is any lost, abandoned, or discarded fishing gear.
A rusty trap.
A lot of marine debris that washes up on shorelines and that's lost at sea actually is ghost gear.
The boat cuts through calm water.
And guess what? That gear, much of it is made of plastic.
Captain Larkin studies a monitor.
Pretty well everything that we use in the fishery has a plastic base. So whether it be nets, rope. Rope is made from a plastic, actually. Looks like little plastic beads. And then they manufacture that into rope.
Ropes hang.
Traps are coated with a plastic coating.
Dr. Chelsea Rochman.
When we think about plastic in the ocean, ghost gear or lost fishing gear is one of the biggest problems out there. So plastic nets, plastic line, other plastic floats and buoys.
Plastic makes gear more durable, but not indestructible. After all, this is the ocean we're talking about.
If you was able to pull a plug and drain the water into the ocean, you're either going to have mud, or you're going to have rocks, or you're going to have cliffs, or whatever the case. Whatever you see on land is basically the same thing you're going to see on the ocean floor. Trying to fish in an area where the bottom is very rocky and cliffy with sharp rocks, it's going to be hard on your rope, very hard. Your ropes have to break.
Caption. The global fishing industry loses more than 500,000 tons of fishing gear every year. Sailboats float in a calm harbor. On Captain Larkin's boat,
Ghost gear can be, well, scary stuff. For one thing, it keeps fishing without the fishers.
It's not good for the species that live in the ocean. I mean, they could get snarled up into something or trapped into something and not be able to get out.
But there's another way that lost fishing gear and any plastic can haunt the sea.
As ghost gear gets lost, the gear breaks down over time, which ultimately gets released into the ocean environment.
debris floats.
It will last for a long time. It will follow the currents. It might sink down to the bottom. But over time, the sunlight and the wave action starts to break it down smaller and smaller, and it breaks down into something called microplastics.
Jesse shows a trap.
So if you see the metal is rusting away here, and we have some PVC plastic that's pulling away from it.
She twists off a plastic thread.
Plastic doesn't biodegrade. Look, it chips off. It'll go into smaller pieces, but it'll never just disappear.
But if plastic gets smaller, it takes up less space. Isn't that a good thing?
The reality is it's breaking down into these smaller and smaller pieces, which then are available to more and more wildlife because they can literally fit it in their mouth. They're eaten by animals at every level of the food chain, from your smallest zooplankton to your largest whales and sharks.
A whale and shark hover near the surface. A trap is lowered into the water.
So what happens when plastic fishing gear becomes plastic fish food? We're still trying to answer that question. But we're talking about pieces smaller than a pencil eraser. And the ocean is the largest ecosystem on the planet. So researchers have turned to a more manageable marine environment, a lake.
The Experimental Lakes area in northwestern Ontario, it's basically a living laboratory, and we're using the lakes to better understand microplastic in the environment.
A small circular fish farm.
We first get to know the lake very well. Who are the animals that live there? How big are their populations? Are they healthy? And then we can actually put microplastic in the lake to understand where does it go? Where does it go within the ecosystem and how does it impact the wildlife in it?
Yellow sludge floats.
Once the experiment is over, the plastic is removed and the lake can recover.
Several circular areas are cordoned off.
The lake helps us understand plastics in a natural environment. But to get a complete picture, the team needs even more control. So they're also working in the lab.
Subtitles, Dr. Ludovic Hermabessier. The topic we're researching here with this lab experiment is a bit of a subtopic of what is being researched in the experimental lakes area. The fish are exposed to plastic. It's the same type of plastic, except that the yellow one has chemicals in it as opposed to the green one. Here we want it to be above what is happening in a natural environment so that we can understand the role of additives in the toxicity of plastics.
In the lab, the focus is on toxicity, which is one way that plastic can harm wildlife.
Subtitles. Plastic in general is a long chain of molecules, and certain chemicals can be added to it to produce certain properties. For example, soft plastics are due to the addition of some chemicals that make plastic soft. Here, we want to know if these molecules can have a role in the toxicity of these microplastics. For example, will the fish that were exposed grow more or less than those that were not exposed?
And toxicity isn't the only problem.
When animals are eating plastic instead of eating food, they lose out on nutrition. It might make an animal feel full, but it doesn't have the nutrients it needs to grow, that it needs to reproduce, to give it that energy just to escape a predator, to survive in the wild.
In the laboratory,
what is interesting is that in the control where there is no plastic, the poop tend to sink, whereas when there is plastic, the poop tend to stay at the surface with the plastic.
Dr. Hermabessier peers in a tank. Coils of frayed rope are heaped.
It might seem funny to think we can learn from floating fish poop. But if we're going to understand how plastic is impacting our environment, it's research like this that's going to help. And we still have a lot of unanswered questions.
How does microplastic move through a food web? An animal might swallow it. Do they just excrete it? Does that plastic move into its body? And when a bigger fish eats that smaller fish, does it increase up the food chain or does it decrease?
One thing we know for sure is that all plastic, from large nets to tiny peanut-sized pieces, can cause problems once it gets to the ocean. Problems for sea life and problems for us.
If the animals are eating the plastic and we eat animals from the ocean, we are eating the plastic. So this mismanagement of this plastic that we are using is coming back to haunt us in the seafood that we eat.
Sushi.
Plastic in our food, it's a hair-raising thought. Which is why ghost gear busters like Jesse and Mike are out fishing for lost gear.
There's no reason to leave that gear there if you can get it back. It's not good for anybody. It's not good for the environment or the species that are in the water.
And why we should all be mindful of leaving any plastic behind, no matter where we are.
It's important that we stop some of the sources of microplastics in the marine environment, but also that we're properly managing waste on land so we prevent garbage from coming into the ocean and generating microplastics.
Captain Larkin.
This is what we got to work with. This is our life, and we have to take care of it.